Hello, it's Maya Andreasen, and welcome to Modeling Basics Part 3. We most recently used the Quad Draw tool to make a high poly model, to retopologize a high poly model into its low poly version. If I hit H, that is going to make the high poly invisible. And here we see our low poly. But as you notice, the low poly has high poly information on it. So what I did was I basically took the high poly version and I did something called baking. So I took all the information from the high poly and I transferred it to the low poly as a texture, something called a normal map. And right here is the normal map that I'm talking about. And so I'm going to take you through how to bake textures in Maya and how we can do this and how we can get this effect. So the first thing you want to do is really set up your files so that they're easy to tell apart. Right now I'm over here in the outliner. You see where my pointer is. And you see that I have my hills underscore high poly, and I named my hills underscore low poly. So you need to have your high and your low poly named. It's good to name them pretty much the same except for maybe the suffix or the prefix. The next thing that we need to do is you need to make sure that you have laid out the UVs to your low poly. The high poly doesn't matter, but the low poly it does. So I'm going to make the high poly invisible. And I'm going to, for the low poly, I'm going to go to my UV editing tool so that you can see how my UVs are laid out. So I basically just took my UVs and I planar mapped them. So I went to UV, planar options box. I made sure it was in the Y. So what happens is with the Y planar, the plane is going to point down or up depending on where it's pointing. It's going to point down at this flat object here, or relatively flat. And then you also want to make sure that keep image width height ratio is checked on, and then you click project. And lastly, I optimized it. So once it's unfolded, I clicked optimize and I got this shape. And as you can see, all of my squares here look square. So if you have, so this is a template texture. So if any of the squares are rectangular or they look stretched or something like that, that means that your texture will not show up properly on your object. What you really want is to have a whole bunch of basically squares. You also want to make sure that your UVs stay in this one-to-one space. So we are not using UDIMs or anything like that. We are just using this U1, V1 space, and that's where our texture is going to stay. Otherwise, what happens is the texture repeats if you make it bigger. So we always want to keep it to this space. Okay, so once we have done that, we'll go back to Modeling Classics so we can see everything. And let's go into how to bake all of this information down to this information. Okay, so what we did was with the low poly selected, I'm going to go to rendering. So we go to the drop down here, the modeling drop down, and we select rendering, lighting and shading, transfer maps. Okay, so now that we have our transfer maps, let's just clear all. We're going to remove this old map and we're going to start from scratch. So for my hills low poly, it's my target mesh, so I'm going to add selected. And my source mesh is going to be my high poly version, and I'm going to add that to this area. The next thing I'm going to do is on my target mesh under display, hit envelope. And you're going to get this yellow thing here, or not yellow, pink, right? And if you put an envelope of 1, you see some of the high poly peeking out from the low poly. You want to capture as much information as possible. So in order to do that, we need to extend the envelope so that it's completely enveloping all of that high poly information, or for the most part it's doing so. There's a tiny bit here, so I could make it just a little bit bigger. let's see, 4.3 or 4.5, and it would really get all of that information. And then what's going to happen is it's going to capture, this envelope is going to capture all of that high poly information and transfer it as a texture map to the low poly information. So the next thing we want to do is go to our output maps and click normal. So in order to save our normal map, we want to go to this file folder here and click it. And what we're going to do is we're going to type in the name. You also want to make sure you're in the correct file folder. So as you can see, I'm in my source images folder, which is where I want to be. And I'm going to call this normal_hills. And then I'm also going to change the file type. So I'm actually going to make it a targa. And as you can see, the moment I do that, we can see that original normal map that I showed you at the beginning of the video right here. We already have it. So I just switch the name so it doesn't overwrite. And we click save. And when you do that, you'll see that the file format has now changed right here. Okay. Now the next thing we want to do, let's make this just a little bit bigger, is we want to go to the connect output maps, make sure we connect the maps to a new shader, and then we're going to go to Maya common output and scroll down. Now this is where you're going to make your width and height of your map. So I just did, for the sake of this tutorial, 1024 by 1024 because I wanted to create the map relatively quickly. Of course, you could do 2048 by 2048, where you're going to get more information. So we could do that, 2048 by 2048. And as long as keep aspect ratios checked, it'll update the height. You're going to transfer to world space. And then your sampling quality, for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to keep it at medium. But I mean, if this was a really high K map, like a 4K map, you'd want it to be high. So we'll just keep it to medium. And file texture seems to 1. And then all you do is click bake and close. And once we do that, you will see down here at the bottom of your screen, you'll see that it is baking. And then if you've done everything correctly, you will get a normal map. Okay, and that will be in your source images folder. Now, the other thing that you will have, let's go to my Hypershade. And the Hypershade is this little icon that looks like a martini olive. Here it is. If we go to our Hypershade, we can see that we have our a brand new shader here. Now I've already renamed it, but it would be called Lambert 2. I would recommend immediately renaming it so that you know what it is. And then you also still have that envelope shader. You can always do edit, delete unused nodes, and it'll go away. In order to make sure that you see your normal map, so if you hit 5 on your keyboard, all we're going to see is the shading of the object, but if you hit 6, that's when you see texture. So if all we had was the normal map attached and we didn't have any color channels, which is probably what you will see initially, suddenly you will see on your low poly the all of the normal map baked information on your low poly model. All right, that is how you bake a high poly model down to a normal map that can be applied to its low poly equivalent. I'm Maya Andreasen. Until next time, bye-bye.